My first real ski trip was supposed to be one of those memories you look back on and laugh about later. It was meant to be fun, careless, and completely normal. Nothing about it was supposed to stay with me the way it did. There were four of us on the trip: me, Angel, Amy, and Jessica. We were all in our early 20s, and none of us had ever taken a proper winter vacation before. Colorado felt like a big step for us. Cold weather, mountains, skiing, snowboarding, all of it felt new and exciting. We flew into Denver and drove the rest of the way to Snowmass. The Airbnb we rented was just outside Aspen, tucked away in a quiet area surrounded by trees. During the day, it looked peaceful and expensive, the kind of place meant for relaxing weekends and family vacations. At night, though, it felt strangely cut off from everything else. The first night passed without incident. We dropped our bags, went out to eat, drank at a local bar, and came back exhausted. I fell asleep quickly and didn't think twice about where we were staying. The next morning, we headed straight to the mountain. I should explain something about myself. I was terrible at snowboarding. I had tried it once before, years earlier, on a tiny beginner slope. I assumed I would pick it up quickly this time. I was wrong. The mountain was overwhelming. People moved fast and confidently around me, carving through the snow like it was nothing. I fell constantly. Every time I stood up, someone flew past me, spraying snow in my face. It was humiliating, and by the second day, I was exhausted and frustrated. Halfway down a blue run, my legs burned so badly that I gave up and sat down on the side of the slope. I remember staring at the snow beneath me, feeling embarrassed and defeated. That's when I noticed him. He was stopped uphill from me, adjusting his board. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People stopped all the time. But then he slid down slowly and stopped closer than necessary. He asked if I was okay. His voice was calm and friendly. He looked normal. Average height, average build, maybe late 30s. Nothing about him screamed danger. I told him I was fine and that it was my first real time snowboarding. He laughed and said the mountain could be rough for beginners. The conversation only lasted a few seconds, but something about it felt off. People didn't usually stop to talk like that. Still, I brushed it off, stood up, and continued down the mountain. A few minutes later, I fell again. This time, I sat there longer, catching my breath and fighting the urge to cry. When I looked uphill, my stomach dropped. He was coming back. Slowly, deliberately. He stopped right next to me this time. He unstrapped his board and sat down far closer than he needed to. I could smell his breath through my ski mask, and I remember leaning away without even thinking about it. He started talking about how crowded the resort had become, how it wasn't like it used to be. Then his tone changed. He said he wasn't used to seeing so many pretty girls alone on the mountain. That sentence made my chest tighten. I was wearing a helmet and ski mask. Most of my face was covered. There was no reason for him to say that. I told him I was there with my boyfriend. He smiled and said he'd see me arrive with only girls. The way he said it made it clear he had been watching. Not just that moment. Longer than that. I stood up immediately. I didn't say anything else. I rode down the rest of the mountain faster than I ever had before. I didn't fall once. I don't remember much about the ride down, only the overwhelming need to get away from him. At the bottom, I went straight into the lodge and called my friends. My hand was shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. I told them what happened, and they could hear how scared I was. We decided to leave the mountain early that day. That night, we went out to eat and tried to enjoy ourselves, but I couldn't relax. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him again. When we got back to the Airbnb, everyone went to bed quickly. I stayed awake, scrolling on my phone, replaying the conversation in my head. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps inside the house. At first, I assumed it was one of the girls going to the bathroom, but the footsteps didn't stop. They moved slowly down the hallway. Then I heard my doorknob turn. My entire body went cold. I quietly got out of bed and cracked my door open just enough to see into the hallway. A tall shadow moved from door to door, pausing at each one. When he reached mine, he tried the handle again. Then he pushed. I locked the door and called 911, whispering into the phone. The pushing turned into banging. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I screamed that the police were coming. Everything stopped. In a calm, almost gentle voice, he said, "Okay, sweetheart." Then his footsteps moved away. Police arrived minutes later. The front door was unlocked. I never saw him again, but I know he followed me from the mountain. When my father died, everything in my life felt strangely quiet. He had been the kind of man who always filled a room with calm energy, even when he wasn't talking. Losing him didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt empty, like someone had turned off a constant background noise I didn't realize I depended on. A month after the funeral, his cabin near Mount Bachelor in Oregon was scheduled to be sold. It had been in our family for decades, but none of us lived close enough to keep it. Before it went on the market, I decided to stay there alone for a few days. I told everyone I needed time to think, but the truth was I just didn't want to be around people. I brought my dog, Midnight, with me. He was a large black lab mix, gentle but alert, and I trusted his instincts more than my own. The drive up was long and quiet. Snow lined the road, and the trees grew thicker the closer I got. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly as I remembered it. Old, sturdy, and isolated. No neighbors in sight. Just trees, snow, and silence. The first day was peaceful. I snowboarded in the afternoon, cooked dinner, and watched old DVDs my dad used to keep stacked near the TV. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The second day passed the same way. Nothing felt off. If anything, the isolation felt comforting. Midnight stayed close, but that wasn't unusual for him in unfamiliar places. It was the third day when things changed. Heavy snow started falling that morning, thick enough that I decided to stay inside. Around noon, while making coffee, I glanced out the window and noticed something that immediately caught my attention. Footprints. They circled the cabin. At first, I assumed they were old tracks from when I arrived, but when I looked closer, I realized they were fresh. Crisp edges. No snow settled inside them yet. The nearest cabins were unoccupied. I knew that for a fact. I told myself it was probably someone hiking through the area. Still, I locked the doors. That evening, Midnight started acting strange. He paced near the back door, whining softly. When I opened it to let him out, he stepped onto the porch and froze. He stared into the trees. Not barking, not growling, just staring. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing. When I called him back inside, he resisted, ears flat, tail low. I had to pull him in by the collar. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard something above me. Footsteps. Slow, even, heavy. They moved from one end of the roof to the other. I held my breath, listening. The sound didn't match branches or animals. It sounded deliberate, like someone walking. I grabbed a flashlight and went onto the balcony. The beam cut across the snow-covered roof, but nothing was there. No tracks, no damage. As I turned back inside, I noticed movement in the trees. Something tall, too tall. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the branches. Then it shifted slightly, and I saw pale arms stretched upward, gripping the tree above it. Its body was twisted unnaturally between the branches. It didn't move. It didn't blink. I couldn't make out a face, just an open mouth frozen in place. I backed inside and locked everything. Midnight refused to leave my side. Later that night, something tapped on the glass. Light taps. Slow. Patient. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, listening to it continue for nearly an hour. It never tried to come inside. It just waited. At sunrise, I packed my car and left. Some places don't want you there. My family owns a small ski house in northern Vermont, tucked deep into the woods about 20 minutes from the nearest town. It isn't anything special. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace, and a narrow deck that wraps around the back. What makes it unsettling isn't the house itself, but how isolated it is. Once you turn off the main road, it's just trees, snow, and silence for miles. I grew up spending winters there, so the isolation never bothered me. If anything, I found it comforting. That's why, when my parents offered to let me use the place for a weekend getaway, I didn't hesitate. I invited the girl I was seeing at the time, Melissa. We'd been dating for a few months, and she liked the idea of a quiet winter trip. We arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sky was starting to darken. Snow covered everything, untouched and smooth. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, lights off, standing alone against the tree line. I remember feeling relaxed as I unlocked the door, like I'd stepped back into a familiar memory. That first evening was uneventful. We unpacked, lit the fireplace, made dinner, and drank wine. Melissa commented on how quiet it was. No cars, no distant sounds, just the wind moving through the trees. I told her you got used to it. The next morning, I decided to teach her how to snowboard. The property slopes gently downward behind the house. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough for practice. It was something I'd done countless times growing up. The weather was clear but cold. The snow squeaked under our boots as we walked uphill. Melissa laughed as she fell again and again, brushing snow off her jacket. It felt normal, peaceful. We were halfway through the lesson when we heard a voice. "Hello." It came from the woods. I stopped immediately. Melissa did too. We both looked toward the trees. "Hello." The voice called again. It sounded like a man. Adult. Calm. I scanned the tree line, but didn't see anyone. The trees were thick, shadows layered on shadows. I called back, asking if everything was okay. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "I thought I saw someone out here." I assumed it was a lost hiker or maybe someone from a nearby property, even though I knew there weren't many. I told him we were just practicing. "Okay," he said. "Sorry to bother you." The voice faded as if he'd turned away. Melissa laughed nervously and asked if that happened often. I told her no, but I didn't think much of it. People wandered through the woods sometimes. At least, that's what I told myself. That afternoon, we stayed inside. Snow began falling again, thick and steady. As evening approached, I noticed something strange outside the kitchen window. Footprints. They came from the direction of the woods and stopped near the back of the house. I followed them visually, expecting them to continue around the side. They didn't. They ended abruptly, as if whoever made them had stopped and stood still for a long time. I didn't mention it to Melissa. That night, after dinner, we sat on the couch watching a movie. The fireplace was the only source of light besides the television. At some point, Melissa muted the TV. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I listened. Footsteps. Slow crunching sounds outside. Not close enough to see, but close enough to hear clearly through the walls. They moved from one side of the house to the other, then stopped. I stood up and looked out the window. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. Just snow falling softly. The footsteps didn't come back. We went to bed shortly after. I slept lightly, waking at every small sound. At some point in the night, I heard something near the back of the house. A faint metallic clink. The next morning, I found a shed door open. The shed sat about 20 feet from the house. We kept old tools, firewood, and random junk inside. The door was never left open. Ever. When I stepped closer, I noticed something else. Condensation drifted out of the opening. Someone had been breathing in there recently. I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. I checked inside quickly. Nothing was missing. No one was there. Melissa noticed my mood change and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought an animal might have gotten into the shed. She didn't look convinced. That night, the wind was louder. The house creaked, as it always did in cold weather. We sat quietly, both of us distracted. Around midnight, we heard a voice. "Help me." It came from outside the house. Melissa froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. "Help me," the voice said again. Louder this time. Closer. It sounded strained, almost weak. Every instinct I had told me to go outside, that someone might actually need help. But Melissa grabbed my arm hard. "Don't," she said. "Please don't." The voice continued. "I'm hurt. Please." Something about it felt wrong. Too controlled. Too steady for someone in pain. I moved slowly toward the window and lifted the curtain just enough to see outside. The yard was empty. No one stood there. That's when the footsteps started. They ran toward the house. Fast. Heavy. Melissa screamed as something slammed into the side of the house. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to shake the walls. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. The knocking stopped. We waited for what felt like hours. Nothing else happened that night. When morning came, the fear didn't leave. I stepped outside cautiously and looked around the house. Footprints surrounded it. They circled every window, every door, over and over. There were no tracks leading away. We packed immediately and left. I haven't gone back since. I took the night shift job because it paid better and because I didn't think it would be that bad. I was wrong about both. The place was a small distribution warehouse on the edge of town, tucked between an industrial park and a stretch of woods that ran for miles. During the day, it was loud and busy. Trucks coming and going. Forklifts buzzing around. People everywhere. At night, it became something else entirely. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was the only one inside the building after midnight. The job itself was simple. Monitor security cameras, check delivery logs, and occasionally walk the floor to make sure nothing looked off. The first week went by without incident. The quiet actually felt relaxing. I listened to podcasts, drank coffee, and did my rounds every hour. The second week was when things started to feel wrong. It began with the cameras. One of the cameras covered the far loading dock, the one rarely used at night. I noticed movement on it just after 2 a.m. A figure passed through the frame, quick and blurry. I assumed it was a glitch. When I rewound the footage, there was nothing there. The next night, it happened again. Same camera, same time. This time, the figure paused at the edge of the frame before disappearing. I zoomed in. It looked like a person. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the warehouse. Every door was locked. The loading dock was empty. No signs of forced entry. No footsteps. Nothing. I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark. Then I started hearing footsteps. Not loud ones. Soft, like someone walking slowly, careful not to be heard. They came from the far end of the warehouse, near the shelves stacked high with pallets. The first time I heard them, I froze. I waited. The sound stopped. I checked the cameras. Nothing. By the third night, I dreaded going in. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time, they moved closer. I could hear them clearly now. Step. Pause. Step. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. The footsteps stopped again. I did my round anyway, forcing myself to walk the entire floor. I didn't see anyone, but I noticed something strange near the loading dock. One of the emergency exit doors was unlocked. I knew I had locked it earlier. I locked it again and went back to the office, heart pounding. That's when the intercom crackled. Hello. The voice was calm. Male. Too calm. I stared at the intercom, unable to speak. Is someone working tonight? The voice asked. I finally answered, telling them they needed to leave and that the police would be called. The intercom clicked off. Every camera went dark at once. The lights flickered. Then the footsteps started running. I locked myself in the office and called the police. They arrived 10 minutes later. The warehouse was empty. Every door locked. No signs of entry. When I quit the next morning, my manager told me something I wish I hadn't heard. He said the last night guard disappeared on shift 2 years earlier. They never found him.